She called my job a little hobby with a business card in front of my entire family, and they all laughed. Even my dad, even my mom. The only person who didn't laugh was me, because I had stopped breathing somewhere between the appetizers and the main course. Let me back up. My sister's husband, my brother-in-law, he works in commercial real estate. Big deals, big clients, the kind of guy who mentions square footage the way other people mention the weather. And last Thanksgiving, he brought his business partner to dinner. I'll call her my brother-in-law's colleague because that's what she was, at least officially. Her name was Petra, and the moment she walked into my parents' house in Baton Rouge, she owned it. She had that energy. You know the kind where a person enters a room and somehow the room arranges itself around them. She was polished in a way that cost real money, not just nice clothes, but the posture, the laugh, the way she held her wine glass slightly away from her body, like she was already thinking about the next room she'd walk into. My brother-in-law loves people like that. My sister honestly does too. They've always moved in a world where confidence and money are the same thing. And then there's me, 29 years old, UX designer. I've been running my own small design studio for 3 years, mostly remote contracts, a few anchor clients, a lot of late nights on my couch in sweatpants doing something most people in my family would describe as, and I am quoting directly, making apps pretty. I'd driven 4 hours from Austin for the holiday. I was tired. I was happy to be there. I was wearing the green wrap dress my mum always said looked nice on me, and I was sitting at the table when Petra asked me what I did. I told her. She smiled. It was a very specific kind of smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes because the eyes are already calculating. She said, "Oh, so like freelance graphic design?" I said, "More like UX research and product design. I work with software companies mostly. We handle everything from user testing to interface architecture." She nodded the way people nod when they've stopped listening, and then she turned to the table and said, "It's sweet. It's like a little hobby with a business card." She laughed first and the table followed. My brother-in-law chuckled. My sister smiled into her napkin. My dad made the face he makes when he's uncomfortable but doesn't want to make it worse, which meant he laughed a little too. My mom said, "We're just so proud of her for following her passion," which sounds supportive unless you understand my family, in which case you know that following your passion is code for, "We're not sure this is real." I didn't say anything. I picked up my fork and I took a very slow bite of green bean casserole, and I let the moment pass. Have you ever been the one at the table who everyone finds it easy to talk over? I'd love to know I'm not alone. Leave me a comment. Here's what nobody at that table knew. 6 weeks earlier, I had signed a contract with a mid-sized healthcare tech company to redesign their entire patient portal. The deal was worth $430,000 over 18 months. It was the biggest single contract my studio had ever landed, and I hadn't told anyone in my family, not because I was hiding it exactly. More because I had learned, very slowly, over many years, that sharing good news with my family felt less like celebration and more like submitting evidence for a verdict I was going to lose anyway. So I hadn't said a word, I just smiled. And I let Petra call my business a hobby with a business card. And I drove home 2 days later with the windows down on I-10. And I thought, I'm done explaining myself to people who've already decided what I am. That should have been the end of it. It almost was. Except for what happened at my sister's birthday dinner 3 months later. She'd booked a private room at a restaurant in New Orleans, the kind of place where they don't put prices on the menu because if you're asking, you shouldn't be here. My brother-in-law had organized the whole thing. Petra was there again because apparently she and my brother-in-law were now close friends or something adjacent to that. I was never entirely clear on the details. What I was clear on was that she had brought along her own energy and her own agenda, and by the second course, she had managed to steer the entire table toward a conversation about a project she was working on. She was consulting on a new real estate app, a platform for commercial property investors. She was very excited about it. She talked about it for about 10 minutes straight, including the UI, the user flows, the design language, and the way the onboarding experience needed to feel premium but frictionless. She threw around words like affordances and information hierarchy, and she used them mostly correctly, which meant she'd done enough Googling to sound fluent from a distance. Then she said something that made my fork stop midair. She said she'd been in talks with a design studio out of Austin to handle the interface work. She said the initial concepts had looked promising. She said the studio was small but talented. And then she said the problem was their pricing was completely unreasonable for a startup at this stage, so they decided to walk away and find someone more budget aligned. I set my fork down. Because my studio is in Austin, and 8 weeks earlier, Petra's real estate app had come to me through a referral. I'd had 3 calls with their product team. I had built out a full preliminary scope and sent over a proposal. And then I'd gotten a very brief email saying they were moving in a different direction. That was it. No negotiation, no counter. Just we're moving in a different direction. And now she was sitting across from me at my sister's birthday dinner telling my entire family, including my parents who had driven in from Baton Rouge, that my pricing was unreasonable. She didn't know it was me. That was clear. She hadn't connected Austin Design Studio to the woman she'd called a hobby at Thanksgiving. Why would she? I wasn't the type of person she filed away as someone to remember. I took a sip of water. I looked at my sister, who was smiling at Petra with the expression she uses when she wants someone to like her. I looked at my brother-in-law, who was nodding along. I looked at my parents, who were listening politely because they didn't know enough about my industry to follow the conversation. And I thought, okay, I need to know exactly what happened here. Because moving in a different direction had never sat right with me. My proposal had been solid. I knew it was solid. I'd priced it at market rate for the scope they'd asked for, not $1 over. The team had seemed genuinely interested through all 3 calls. And then radio silence. I smiled. I said, "That's so interesting. What studio was it, out of curiosity?" She waved a hand. "I don't remember the exact name. Something kind of minimal, like a 1 or 2 word thing." I said, Austin has a great design scene." She said, "Sure, but you get what you pay for, or in this case, what you don't pay for." She smiled at the table. A couple people smiled back. I smiled too. Then I went home that night, opened my laptop, and started doing what I actually do for a living. Not making apps pretty. Researching. I pulled up the email chain from 8 weeks ago. I looked at the contact who'd reached out to me. I cross-referenced the company name against public LinkedIn data and incorporation records available through the Louisiana Secretary of State's business database because the referral had mentioned the entity was registered there. Standard stuff. The kind of due diligence I do on every client before I start a project. What I found took me about 40 minutes. The company Petra was consulting for was not a startup. It had been incorporated for 2 years. It had 1 registered agent. That agent's name was not Petra, but the registered address was the same building as her brokerage firm, and the sole owner on record, the single-member LLC listed in the filings, was my brother-in-law. I sat back in my chair. I read it again, then a 3rd time. My brother-in-law was the owner of the app Petra was consulting on, which meant my brother-in-law was the client who had walked away from my proposal, which meant the whole thing, Petra's little presentation at dinner, the comment about unreasonable pricing, all of it, had happened 12 feet away from the person they'd ghosted. He had never mentioned it. Not once. Not when the referral came through. Not during any of the 3 calls where his own product team had been on the line. Not when they sent the rejection email. He'd just let it happen. Let me do the work. Let me send the proposal. And then vanished. But that still wasn't the part that made my hands go cold. I kept digging. Not out of anger, exactly. More out of that particular stillness that comes over me when something doesn't add up and I need to understand why. In my work, that instinct has saved clients from expensive mistakes more times than I can count. That night, it was saving me from something else. I found a design portfolio online. It had gone live about 5 weeks ago, right around the time I'd gotten the rejection email. The portfolio belonged to a freelancer. Her bio said she specialized in clean, conversion-focused UX for real estate and fintech verticals. Her featured case study was a commercial property platform. The screenshots showed an onboarding flow, a dashboard, a property card component. I had sent those exact wireframes to my brother-in-law's product team as part of my preliminary scope document. The document was clearly marked confidential and for proposal purposes only, standard language I include in every pitch. The layouts weren't identical. They changed the colors, moved a few elements around. But the underlying structure, the navigation model, the information hierarchy, the specific solution I designed for how users filter property types, it was mine. I'd spent 11 hours on that scope document. I knew every decision in it and why I'd made it. They hadn't hired someone else instead of me. They'd taken what I built, handed it to someone cheaper, and had that person trace over my work. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was upset, although I was, because I was thinking. And when I'm thinking, I'm working. Here's something useful about being a UX designer who's been freelancing for 3 years. You learn very quickly that your work has to be protected because no one else is going to protect it for you. I had started embedding invisible metadata signatures into every document and wireframe file I sent out as part of a pitch. A specific alphanumeric string baked into the file properties, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it, unique to each proposal, time-stamped and logged in my project management system. It was something a designer friend had taught me after she'd had her own work stolen 2 years before. I'd set it up and honestly half forgotten about it because I'd never needed it. Until now. I pulled up the freelancer's portfolio. Some of her assets were downloadable. A PDF case study. I downloaded it. I opened it in my editing software. I went to the document properties. There it was, buried in the metadata, my signature string. The one assigned to the proposal I'd sent to my brother-in-law's company on a Tuesday in October. They had taken my file. They had not even opened a new document. They had built directly on top of mine and exported it as a PDF. I made a backup of everything. Then I called my IP attorney, who I have on retainer because freelance life teaches you certain lessons fast. She told me what I had was solid. She told me we could pursue it. She also told me very calmly that I should wait until I had the full picture before I did anything. So that's what I did. My sister's 30th birthday was in February. Big celebration. My parents flew in. My aunt and uncle drove up. There was a party at a rooftop venue in the warehouse district with a rented out bar and a photo booth and a playlist my sister had curated herself. It was genuinely lovely. I was happy for her. I was also watching. Petra was there. My brother-in-law was there. His app had apparently launched in soft beta a couple months earlier. He'd mentioned it to my dad over the phone. I know because my dad had called to tell me about this exciting new thing my brother-in-law was building. He'd used the word innovative. My dad likes that word. He doesn't fully know what it means, but it sounds impressive and expensive. About an hour into the party, someone asked my brother-in-law to say a few words. He obliged. He talked about my sister, genuinely and sweetly, and I mean that. He loves her. I don't think that's the part that was broken. Then he pivoted to the launch because he can't fully help himself, and he invited Petra up to join him, and they did this casual little joint announcement about the platform going live, the early traction, the exciting design work that had made it all come together. And Petra said in front of my parents and my aunt and my uncle and about 60 of my sister's closest friends, sometimes you find the right creative partners and the whole thing just clicks. I was standing about 10 feet back with a glass of sparkling water. I had been quiet all night. I am good at being quiet. My sister caught my eye. She mouthed, "You okay?" I smiled. I nodded. Then I said, "Actually, could I say something? Just a quick toast for my sister." People made space. That's the thing about being the quiet one. When you finally ask for the floor, you get it, because no one is expecting much. I stepped forward. I held up my glass toward my sister first, and I meant everything I said about her. I told her she was the kind of person who made every room warmer just by being in it, and that was true. It is true. I love my sister. She was tearing up a little by the time I finished that part. Then I turned slightly, not toward my brother-in-law, toward Petra. I said, Petra, you mentioned the creative partnership that made the platform come together. I'd love to actually talk about that. She smiled, politely confused. I said, the preliminary wireframes for the onboarding flow and property dashboard, the navigation architecture, the filter logic for the property type selector. I'd love to know how those came to be, because I spent 11 hours designing them in October. I send them to your client as a confidential pitch document, and I have the metadata to prove it. The room did not erupt. It got very quiet in the specific way rooms get quiet when something real just happened and no one knows yet what it means. I looked at my brother-in-law. He had the expression of someone who had been holding a breath for 4 months and had just run out of air. I said, I'm not doing this to ruin anyone's night. I'm saying it because I found out 2 hours before this party that my attorney filed the formal notice today. The letter went to the LLC's registered address this afternoon. I thought you should hear it from me directly rather than open your mail on Monday and be surprised. I looked at Petra. I said, I do want to say, for the record, that calling my work a hobby with a business card at Thanksgiving was a very interesting choice, given that you had already reviewed my proposal at that point and found it impressive enough to hand to another designer as a template. Another long silence. My mum made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a swallowed word. My dad looked at my brother-in-law with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something close to disappointment that he didn't know how to carry yet. I turned back to my sister. I said, Happy birthday. I love you. I'm sorry this happened at your party. And I meant that too, genuinely. I set my glass down on the table next to me. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair, and I walked out. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I planned it for maximum impact, and I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about the timing. I had thought about the timing, but the truth is I found out about the filing that afternoon, 2 hours before the party, and I made a decision. The decision was that these 2 people had sat at tables with my family and made me smaller while building something on top of my work. And the moment I walked into that party, I knew I wasn't going to get through the whole night pretending I didn't know. What happened after is still unfolding. The legal piece is with my attorney. I'm not going to talk about the specifics, but I will say that when you have time-stamped metadata and a documented chain of file access, it tends to clarify conversations very quickly. The freelancer, for what it's worth, reached out to me directly within a week. She hadn't known. She'd been handed files and told they were internal working documents. I believe her. We talked for a long time. We're not friends exactly, but I don't think she's a bad person. My brother-in-law called me 4 times the week after the party. I let them go to voicemail. In the 3rd message, he said he'd made a mistake and he was sorry and he wanted to fix it. In the 4th, he said I had humiliated him in front of 60 people and he thought I was being vindictive. Both of those things can be true simultaneously, and I've made peace with that. My sister texted me. She said she didn't know. I believe her too. She said she needed a little time and I respected that. We talked 3 weeks later. It was hard and honest, and we're still sisters. That part matters to me. My parents didn't know what to do with any of it. My mom called and said she felt like I should have come to her first before doing something so public. My dad called separately and was very quiet for most of the call and then said, in his particular way, that doesn't have a lot of words attached to it. I should have said something at Thanksgiving. That call mattered more to me than I can fully explain. Petra has not contacted me. I didn't expect her to. I've thought a lot about why I stayed quiet for so long. Not just about the contract, but about everything. The hobby comment. The years of being the one they talked over and around. I think for a long time I confused keeping the peace with keeping myself. I thought that if I just kept working, kept being good at what I did, the results would eventually speak loudly enough that I wouldn't have to. And maybe that's true in some ideal version of things. But in the real version, in my actual family, in my actual life, the work was invisible until I wasn't. I'm not angry anymore. That surprised me. I thought I'd be angry for a long time, but mostly I feel something closer to clear. Like a room after you've opened all the windows. My studio landed 2 new contracts this quarter. I've started putting my name on my work differently, a little more visibly, because I think I'd been hiding behind the quiet for too long. Not hiding the work exactly, just hiding the fact that it was mine. If you've ever been the person in your family who gets talked over, who gets called the safe one or the quiet one or the practical one, while someone else gets to be the star, I want you to know something. Quiet isn't the same as invisible, and invisible isn't the same as gone. I've been building this whole time, I just finally stopped pretending I wasn't. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best. Not the tiredness that sleep fixes, the kind that settles into your bones over years of Thanksgivings and birthday dinners and phone calls where you say things are going well and nobody asks what that means. I spent a long time believing that if I just kept my head down and kept building, it would eventually be enough, that the results would do the talking, that quiet competence was its own kind of answer. And maybe in some cleaner version of life that's true, but I've learned that the people who've already filed you under safe one or practical one tend not to reopen that file on their own. You have to give them a reason to look again. What Petra did wasn't just arrogant. It was a calculated bet that I was too small to notice and too polite to act. She looked at me at that Thanksgiving table and saw someone who would absorb the insult and move on, because that's what I'd always done. She wasn't entirely wrong about my history. She was completely wrong about where I was headed. There's a version of this story where I say nothing at my sister's birthday party, where I let my attorney handle it in the background, quietly, the way I'd always handled everything quietly. And honestly, I considered it. But I thought about 11 hours of work handed to someone else as a template. I thought about moving in a different direction with no explanation. I thought about a little hobby with a business card set in front of my parents by someone who had already reviewed my proposal and found it valuable enough to steal. And I decided that this time, the quiet version of me wasn't the right tool for the job. What I did took 3 things I'd been developing for years without ever naming them out loud. The first was knowing right from wrong and being willing to act on it even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant standing up in front of 60 people at my sister's party and saying something no one wanted to hear. The second was using my mind, the actual skills I'd built, the metadata signatures, the business filings research, the IP documentation, turning my own professional knowledge into the very thing that protected me. And the third was not folding. Sitting with what I knew for weeks before acting, waiting until I had everything, not letting anger make the decision before preparation could. Those 3 things together are what actually changed the outcome, not luck, not a dramatic confrontation for its own sake. The confrontation only meant something because the work behind it was real. My dad's phone call is the part I keep coming back to, the way he said, quietly, "I should have said something at Thanksgiving." 6 words. It wasn't a big speech. He's not a big speech kind of person. But it told me that the moment at the party hadn't just exposed Petra. It had turned on a light in a room my family had been sitting in for a long time without noticing how dark it had gotten. I don't think my brother-in-law is a bad person. I think he made a bad choice, and then made another one by staying quiet, and then watched the weight of those choices land all at once in a very public room. That's how it tends to work. Not punishment from some outside force, just the natural gravity of decisions that eventually reach the ground. I'm still building. I'm just not hiding the fact that it's mine.